Gervais Restaurant, authentic French cuisine in Silicon Valley.
Interesting board filled with interesting people, and there's always a lively debate. That's what you want in a board. But I think our board is particularly skilled at knowing what their job is, as being fiduciaries of the company. And they also know that there's a hard boundary between that and going to run the company or going to get involved in investigations one way or another. So we have a tremendously valuable board with experience in every industry you can imagine, and they're enormously useful to me. And when I was having a discussion with one of them, and they said, potentially the difference between our board and the HP board is if there had been a leak on our board, somebody would have said, okay, who leaked? And if the answer was no one would have answered, we just would have gone on like, it's like, look, we're in a complex industry, and ethics matter.
John Markoff.
John Doerr just recently stepped off our board.
He's still on the website.
Oh, no, FYI. That's not transparent.
Has he been replaced? What are you doing in terms of transition?
Stay tuned. We don't have a shortage of people who are interested in joining Sun right now, and that applies to the board as much as it does the engineering ranks.
So it's going to increasingly become your board over time, or how do Scott still chair?
It's Sun's board, and I think the idea that a board is going to be in a CEO's hip pocket is kind of gone. The board, and I think, by the way, and our auditors in the audience, you should talk to them. I think better understands now that their job is to hire and fire a CEO. And that's pretty much their obligation. It's to be fiduciaries of the company, make sure that the company's operating with compliance and with integrity, and then to hire and fire the CEO. And so I think my board or Scott's board, it doesn't work that way. They're Sun's shareholders board, and that's exactly how they behave.
So, tutoring on this, you're using the phrase fiduciaries of the company, and I'm just thinking about this in terms of the HP director's behavior. Could you make the argument that the directors are responsible to the shareholders? Or are they not?
No, they absolutely are. They're representatives of the shareholders. They're elected by the shareholders. They're there to represent the best interests of the shareholders. They're not there to represent me or Scott.
So a frustrated director who sort of feels like they need to take things into their own hand, what kind of behavior is leaking? I mean, is it part of the game, or is it a violation?
Is leaking? Well, look, every employee of Sun, and whether you're a shareholder, or whether you're a board member or an executive or an employee, a daily employee, you have similar obligations. You have an employment contract. You have a set of legal obligations as much as ethical obligations and guidelines for how it is that employees behave. So it's no more appropriate for a board member to leak confidential information than it would be for me or for a junior sales rep. It's not okay.
So while we're on the subject of governance, let's talk about options.
Good. What happened to all the topics you said we were going to talk about?
He's on the list. Yeah, good one. But you haven't shown up on any of the backdating lists that have been circulated.
Which is there's absolutely a reason. It's called the integrity of the management team that preceded me. I mean, it wasn't me. I only just got here 185 or so days ago, not that I'm counting. And it's Scott McNealy and Mike Lehman and the board of directors that ensured that the company was being operated with integrity and ethically, and by paying very close attention to all the laws we have to abide by.
And was there a conscious decision not to backdate made somewhere in?
Yeah, there's a conscious decision not to violate the law. I mean, I think we make that decision every day.
Who's your outside counsel?
We have a number of outside counsel. It all depends on what you're talking about. So
I was going to ask about this on senior in particular.
Look, and I think this is another one of those little interesting headlines. Larry Sonsini has contributed to the growth of Silicon Valley, and almost every company here. And so when 3 companies show up with a scandal, and Larry happens to be involved with the company, it's because he's involved with, to my mind, half to 3/4 of all the companies in Silicon Valley. So has Larry, made his presence known? Sure, he's been around, but we work with Skadden Arps, we work with, lots of folks.
So you think he's taking a bad route, basically?
These are not easy questions. I think he's partially taken a bad route. But I think, look, at the end of the day, lawyers give advice. I have a little phrase inside of Sun when somebody blames something on a lawyer. It's like you got 2 choices. You can retract your statement, or I'll move your whole department under legal. Because who's making the decision? And people abide by advice, and they take advice, they listen, but at the end of the day, executives make decisions. They are the ones who are accountable for the decisions they make. Not the auditors, not the lawyers, not the folks who are providing advice and counsel. The folks, the business decision makers are the ones who have to be held to account.
So, you recently made what I think is an unsolicited proposal to the SEC, in the form of a letter suggesting that you could level the playing field and discharge your responsibility with respect to your financials by putting them on the blog, which sounded great. And then today, I was listening to your analyst call, and I realized that one of the sort of second-order effects of sort of the SEC saying you can discharge your duty by putting this stuff up for everybody to look at is that you wouldn't have to go before the analysts and go through that process where they say, well, could we have a little more color on this? They always say color, and I don't know why they say color.
But I'll tell you an interesting little secret. I don't have to go before them today. I choose to.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I do that because I want to be as transparent, as open, as communicative as possible. Same reason I write a blog. That has nothing to do with Reg FD or the fair disclosure of our financials. Look, I talk to a lot of investors. We had a shareholder meeting today. I was talking to more investors, but it just seemed awfully anachronistic to sit in a room with a bunch of folks who show up for the bagels and cream cheese we serve. And our largest institutional investors aren't in an audience.
But what would you not do if you put your financials up in a timely fashion on your blog?
Paid a lot of money to PR Newswire.
That is expensive.
No, it is anachronistic. Yeah. And it's inefficient. What I'd rather do is say, it's on the website. Look, I'm not talking about putting them up on my blog. It's not simply to drive traffic to me. And I haven't stooped that low. It's simply to say, let's recognize the internet as the fairest disclosure of them all. The fact that we have to go through a set of conduits that are not, in fact, as efficient as a website, to me is anachronistic. And it's not the money we pay to PR Newswire, Businesswire, any of that. It's the idea that somehow, in satisfaction of FD, if it shows up in the Wall Street Journal, that's considered more fair and full disclosure than showing up on Sun.com. And I'm sorry, we got more readers than they do. Why? Because we don't charge ours, whatever, $500 a year for the privilege of looking at our website.
Gervais Restaurant, authentic French cuisine in Silicon Valley.
So there is this interesting disintermediation. We'll skip that for the second half.
I don't think, by the way, that Sun publishing its financials on its witbsite is going to stop that little disintermediation thing. I think, some of the traditional media, present company notwithstanding, has that issue already.
Yeah.
Witness the readership, numbers we saw a few days ago.
Yeah. All newspapers, but that's another story.
Yes. We can focus on that for a while. I get to ask you a question.
Jump in. How about it? So how is your blog coming anyway? You've been blogging for how long now?
June of 2004. And on a great day, 14,000 readers. On a bad day, 7,000 readers. And
I should give you some advice, courtesy of John Dvorak.
No, I don't think I want that advice.
No, I think this is actually, Dvorak's point is that a blog is only effective if it's freshened 6 times a day or more.
That's such crap. So let me tell you how I can drive readership, because this would actually be easy to do. Unfortunately, it would be very short-lived. I know a few things about folks who read my blog. I'll give you a few of my favorite. If you put pictures on the blog, more people read it. I don't know why, it seems a little odd, but if you put a picture there, lots of people want to go look at the picture. So that is a cheap trick I use all the time. My blog's now have pictures in them.
You got video too now, is that even more?
And video is a little more questionable, but pictures definitely help. And so, for example, if I put up a picture of our next generation Niagara chip, lots of people want to go look at the picture, so 20,000 people show up, 14,000 people show up. The other way to drive readership is say something really stupid. And the problem with saying something really stupid, like, I'm contemplating a bid to acquire IBM's hardware business. Like, if I put that in my blog, I'd get 900,000 people coming to read that. But a week later, no one would bother reading the blog because that was really stupid, and it wasn't actually true either. So there's a fine balance between just using it as a place to communicate and articulate where the company is headed, things that I worry about, things that I think about, just trying to make sure that we build a community around what we're doing, and then using it just for the purpose of trying to generate the headline. And by the way, I think you face exactly this problem. And by the way, Mr. Dvorak as well, he just chooses to live on the other side of the spectrum.
So how finely crafted are your blog entries? I mean, is this what's on your mind at the moment you sit down, or do you have a collective process? Are they lawyered?
They are only lawyered during the days of or following earnings. And by lawyered, I mean I send them to Mike Dillon, who's our general counsel, who, by the way, writes a blog. And if you want to know what I worry about, it's what Dillon's going to put on his blog. Go read his blog and you'll know why I worry about that. He had a picture recently of a little urn that said ashes of problem employees. And it's like, Mike, why are you So I send them to him to ask him, do I need a safe harbor statement? And if so, can your team go work to put one together? But I know enough, what to talk about and what I can't talk about that I'm not going to hopefully trip any, guide wires.
And so how much is this in addition to, as opposed to instead of old marketing? I mean, how much of this is weighing in marketing and does it replace?
So I'll tell you an interesting, and we can talk about the health of our business, because I'll tell you the single biggest issue we have at Sun is awareness of what we do. Because a lot of people remember, oh yeah, the bubble burst, and boy, those guys really got hurt, and maybe we're not going to talk to them because we think they're still hurting. We're growing, we're generating a lot of cash, we're getting fabulous developer momentum. I was talking to Neil Godry, who's the chief marketing officer, about the products that we have in the marketplace right now. And it's like, it's amazing. All the kids are getting A's in school. We're getting just positive review after review after review. But that's helpful for the developer community. It's helpful for a technical audience. For a CIO and a CFO, they care more about share price and GAAP financials, speaking of options expensing. And so when we show up with a GAAP loss, that doesn't help. It makes it tough to get a new customer. So we're at a point now where, in my belief, we're expanding our existing customers, but acquiring that next customer has become quite difficult. So the number one job of a CEO, it's okay, that was on a network that both runs Java as well as buys their infrastructure from Sun, so you just go ahead and leave that on this on. Please buy the new BlackBerry phone. They're great phones. And then buy lots of stuff online too. In terms of the readers of my blog, first of all, I don't count employees. So they're filtered out. So the 7,000 to 14,000 a day is outsiders. It talks to analysts, industry analysts, financial analysts. I'm always just dumbfounded when I'll go out and have dinner with a big, Wall Street analyst. They'll say, I was reading your blog last night, and wow, that was good. So now I'm getting a better sense of who the audience is. Some customers, they tend to be more technical, they tend to be more junior. I don't know a lot of CIOs who read blogs, with all deference and respect to CIOs. Same thing for CFOs. Some folks in the media, flatter me every once in a while and read what I write. Given how much time and attention I spend reading what they write, it seems only fair. And more than anything else, it just allows me to communicate with the world and drive awareness of what we do.
Has there been any negative yet? Aside from, have you written that stupid thing?
No, there's not a single thing I wish I'd never written. The workload, you all have hard jobs. There's always this little blog guy sitting on my shoulder saying, gotta write something, gotta write something. Yeah. And it's tiring.
And it has to be good enough so that people, embarrass yourself.
It's exactly true. And it has to be thoughtful enough so that it actually says something interesting instead of just, here's a press release, go read this.
But then going back to the question, did it replace anything? Can you get away with not?
So here's a wonderful point. So you all may have noticed that Google just paid $1.6 billion to purchase YouTube. You may have also noticed that the readership in the newspaper industry is declining, which I think is a very disturbing trend for America. And there was also there's a great statistic, which I think my fine friends from McKinsey had assembled, that said the average amount of TV a Palo Alto teenager watches per week is 1 hour. 1 hour, and which is plummeting. And why? Because you'd rather have your MacBook open. It's just more interesting. So I got an email from an employee saying, God, everything seems to be going our way. Momentum is good. Customers are happy. Products are great. Why don't we start taking out some ads on TV? And I responded by saying, because no one would watch them. And that's why so many of our videos are showing up on YouTube. That's why the readership of all of the blogs at Sun, not just my blog, but all of the blogs at Sun, is probably 1 million readers. Now it's just gargantuan readership online. So we're reaching them through so did it replace, what existed? I think it did. And the good news for us is, I'm now in the rare position of being able to comment with some level of authority, just because I had a 2-year blog, on somebody else's strategy, and people read it and believe I'm as credible as you.
You set the bar way too low.
Gervais Restaurant, authentic French cuisine in Silicon Valley.
So, Michael Dell,
Not going to write a blog.
Yeah, but isn't the sort of validating point of this is when one of those guys feels that Mark heard, well, one of those guys feels that he has to do it.
I hope they do.
It hasn't happened yet.
That'd be screaming hilarious. Sam Palmisano writes a blog.
I can see Sam.
I'm not sure he knows what a blog is.
I can see Sam doing it. Of the 3.
Yeah.
So,
I hope he tries.
not only are you blogging, but you've got what percentage of your workforce blogging?
Probably about 10% actively. And some senior executives, the general counsel, the chief technology officer, there's lots of folks from across the company.
So I have to confess, I looked at it today because I wanted to be sort of up and
You wanted to be topical.
Yeah. It was kind of random. I mean,
It is. Look, we have everything from, somebody who describes what it was like to watch their horse have a baby. It was on a Sun.com blog. It was interesting. I'm not sure it related to our business, but whatever drives readership, I suppose. Folks who focus on little esoteric, tiny technology. Somebody who writes about Java and medical devices. How many people in the world care about Java and medical devices? Well, they have a really, faithful readership that cares a lot about what they think. And it is very random, and it ranges from the personal to the technical to the industry perspectives to my favorite books. And no matter what, it drives community, it drives awareness, it brings people closer to Sun. I don't have $1 billion to spend on advertising, and I wish I did. And in the interim, I'm going to use an authentic connection to the folks who care about the stuff that we care about to make sure we keep up a good dialogue.
So that $1 billion, you're not going to put money into television. The blogging stuff doesn't cost you anything. If you had the $1 billion, where would you put it these days, given how the world's changed?
Into the shareholders' pockets? That might be a good place to start. I think I am much more concerned right now about bubbles are interesting things. There's good news and bad news to them. The bad news first is they end. And I wish you all a bubble. They're great fun to be in. Unfortunately, brace yourself, because they do win. Now, the good news about bubbles is they precede build-outs. And what I see across the world right now, in Brazil, in China, Eastern Europe, South and Central America, all across Scandinavia, all across North America, everywhere in the world, people are investing more and more money in network infrastructure. Why? Because they're trying to educate their students, or connect their businesses, or drive new businesses, or deliver government services, or search for oil. No matter what, they're going to use network computing technology to go do that. Which means right now, I'm actually not worried about demand anywhere in the world. Wherever I go, someone will buy IT. But there's 2 kinds of customers for us. And I'll give you a great example of this. I was just at my dentist, and we were just talking about my impending surgery, which made me much more nervous about now. And my dentist had a server in her lobby, and she buys IT. But there's, as I said, 2 kinds of customers in the world. One kind of customer looks at IT as a cost center, and by definition, over time, they're going to get rid of the cost. Why? Moore's Law.
Okay, go on.
And so Moore's Law will rapidly increase and multiply the power of the server that my dentist is running, so that next year she could actually run the whole place on a smaller server. And the year after that, smaller again. The year after that, maybe she'll just go to dentist.com. Our customers are, in part, those that view IT as a cost center. But the problem with hanging out with folks who see IT as a cost center is they actually want to spend less money next year, and if you hang out with them too long, you shrink. Our customers are the ones that are not well served by Moore's Law. Those for which demand for what they build is so wild, is so strong, that they have to continue to build out large-scale infrastructure. Here's my favorite example of that would be Verizon Wireless. You saw the numbers I just posted. IT is now an impediment to the growth of their business. They cannot build data centers fast enough. Google's a great example. They're building large-scale data centers next to hydroelectric power so they can get more infrastructure.
And you argue that some will be able to live off that growing part of this bisected world that you talk about, one collapsing in the face of Moore's Law, one accelerating faster than Moore's Law.
Most big companies have both. Most big companies have payroll. I don't know any company in the world that wants to invest more in payroll right now. They just want to run that thing into the ground. Make sure everybody gets paid, but there's no competitive advantage in your payroll system. On the other hand, your web presence, your customer interaction, the front end of your business, that which touches a customer, people will invest a lot in that. Morgan Stanley's not going to invest less next year in Monte Carlo simulations than they did this year. But they will probably invest less in, payroll. They will want to, or last generation infrastructure.
But I was standing out in front before we started with a person who sort of was in the industry, and we were trying to figure out where you're growing, because there are places where you're not growing. One of the places that, my sample is low, but I think that one of the places where Sun has lost mindshare is in that once loyal crowd that built Internet 1.0. I think those guys, still run, hosting sites and stuff like that, are the guys who build their own stuff.
And a few things that are happening. Today was the first day of startup camp. So we decided on a lark, this is truly, speaking of things must be getting better, because we're actually holding a startup camp.
This is Sun.
Sun.
What is startup camp?
Sorry, startup camp is, we invite a bunch of startups from the Bay Area and see who shows up, and then we talk to them about what do you need as a startup. So we thought we'd hold a little event at the Computer History Museum, and we figured like 100 people or 200 people would show up, and we had, what was the final number? 450, and a huge waiting list. And people were annoyed they couldn't get in.
So what's that? Is that an artifact of a bubble, first of all? We'll talk about it.
Don't ask me to comment on what a bubble is.
Yeah.
B, I know what they look like when they end. I don't know what they look like. I think it's a testament to a few things. One, if you talk to most startups today, they have very different problems than the folks 5 years ago did. For example, they're totally out of storage. Whereas 5 years ago, they needed huge amounts of computing power. Storage was a disaster. Another thing, power has become the second biggest operating expense next to payroll. What? Electricity? I thought that was like free. Well, no, that's actually the number 2 operating expense. Number 3, they're out of physical space. Their data center can no longer provide enough physical space for them. So we have a very different value proposition for that next generation of web companies. But you are correct, and that is one of the things that I worry about. I believe that we have really stabilized and expanded our existing business. I believe on the margins, we're getting incrementally new business from new departments or new areas within those existing customers. But I don't want to just grow by getting the next big insurance company. I want to grow by getting the next company that will displace the insurance industry. Because when you miss those, and they end up being, eBay, you've missed a huge amount of the market space. Now, good news, we caught eBay, and we caught Salesforce.com. We caught a lot of these guys, but there's definitely a bunch that we didn't.
And so how much are you at risk? So you've got these 450 companies. They're all perfect examples of people you'd like to grow with. They have another option. I've been able to see those startup companies around the valley, and there's this Walmart of computing that's on the horizon that's called Amazon, which is selling commodity storage and some compute. I haven't had a chance to ask you that, but I remember when you guys began offering greater commercial on
Yep.
99 cents an hour.
Yep.
I turned around and Walmart was offering it for a dime, as I recall.
Amazon.
What did I say?
Walmart.
Amazon.
Yeah.
For a dime. Maybe Walmart's getting in next. But so
I doubt that.
now a startup, I think, can reasonably, just plug in.
That's a nice idea. It's just not the way that startups are built. By the way, some will do that. Some businesses will be completely built at Salesforce.com. Completely on Salesforce's infrastructure. Or they'll be built on Yahoo's infrastructure or eBay's infrastructure. There are way more small businesses on eBay than on any other, infrastructure out there. Way more. So I guess the one thing we learned with our grid service is, number one, there's no one hammer for all nails. No customer is going to buy all in the same way. Number two, and I'll tell you exactly what happened when we rolled out our grid. So we rolled out the basic concept of a grid. You pay $1, you can come use an hour of a CPU, $1 an hour. By the way, we had thousands of CPUs available, so if you wanted to go render a movie or find oil or do whatever, you could do so. But when the first discussions we started having with big companies went like this, boy, that's a great idea. Let me get corporate security involved. We'll come out, we'll tell you what kind of chain link fence we need to put around our grid. And we're like, hold on. That's not actually how utilities work. Utilities rely on multi-tenant infrastructure. That's why when you all buy electricity in your homes, you don't get to tell the utility company where you want to put your generator. You get to use everyone else's big honking multi-tenant generator. So for most customers, the grid service was completely unacceptable. Just culturally, they couldn't get their way there. The folks who could get there were the developers. And so we have thousands of developers who come and use the grid, who come run relatively complex multi-CPU, multi-threaded applications, and they do fine. But we ran into other impediments like export control regulations. You can't just export computing power to anybody. You got to as much as notarize them. Well, that kind of defeats this whole like instant-on self-provisioning idea of the web. So we ran into a lot of issues. To know, number one, it will serve a portion of the marketplace. But number two, what most people really want is they want the grid in a big box. And so thus, we put it in the biggest box we can find, called a shipping container.
So they have this thing called black box,
which was in essence just taking the grid and saying, okay, where do you want it now? And so for those that don't know what we did, we, everybody was obsessed with this idea that we can build anything out of little tiny computers. And Greg Papadopoulos and a bunch of other smart folks got together and said, well, that doesn't make any sense because it's not the cheap computer that you want, it's cheap computing that you want. So what's the biggest server we can make out of little computers? And the biggest thing you can make, turns out the biggest thing you can move is a shipping container. Therefore, what's the biggest infrastructure you can build inside a shipping container? Turns out you can build a 150 teraflop grid inside a shipping container. So we did. And it's, cheap, instant on, literally takes 5 minutes to boot. I mean, it's a pretty interesting idea.
But you can clearly see.
But it won't be for 100% of the marketplace.
Right.
My dentist, as an example, would look at a black box and say, what on earth am I supposed to do with that? Which points, in all sincerity, it points to this notion that there's a division in the marketplace between those that actually look at a container and say, thank God you showed up with that. And that is literally the response we get from some customers we talk to.
Have you sold any yet, or leased any?
We're not taking purchase orders, but if we wanted to take a purchase order, that would not be a problem right now. So there's no question in my mind we can take purchase orders. It's just we got to take the right ones.
And it's next summer, next spring?
Yes.
Next summer.
Next summer. But look, the interest levels we've had have been from the United Nations, from relief agencies, offshore oil services companies, financial institutions, large-scale web services companies whose names you would all recognize that are trying to cookie-cutter their infrastructure in big warehouses next to cheap power. So there's a lot of really good dialogue, but it's not for everybody.
Well, I see one in the parking lot, like in your parking lot, I mean, in the valley.
Every time you drive past a container, just remember there's a big sub-supercomputer inside. In fact, I was driving over the Bay Bridge and I went past all those big dockyards in Oakland, and I was thinking, I bet there's some in there. Scott had a great idea. Why don't we go to the shipping container companies? Because that container costs like $3,000, and offer to pay them $3,000 if they'll spray a huge Sun logo on the side of it. Because that's actually really cheap advertising. Those things, they stay around forever. So you drive down the road, see a Sun logo. Exactly, and you won't know which one has the supercomputer.
So how is Scott anyway? What's he up to?
He's great. What's he up to? He is flying like a bat everywhere on the planet, helping me make sales calls, talk to governments, engage audiences, whether they're shareholders or developers, and just make sure they know, what Sun is about. He and I, we have different haircuts and we have just different zip codes, but we both care so deeply about the future of Sun. And you wouldn't write a blog, you wouldn't do what I do, and you wouldn't, sure as hell wouldn't do what he does. He's like the hardest working guy in the whole company, if you didn't care deeply about the future of what we do. And we actually believe, a whole swath of us at Sun believe that what we do is actually good for the world. We want to see it succeed because good things happen when we do. And so he, more than anyone else, I think, subscribes to that, and he's going to go make sure that the world knows about it.
Did he ever, when you were number 2, did he ever drive you crazy? Did you ever take a hit on him?
No, and so I was around when he had another COO who did want to take a hit out on him. And I won't tell you who that is. But if you know our history, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I grew up in a family where you yelled at somebody if you loved them. And Scott grew up in a family where you yell at people to prove that you like them and respect them. So we were in lots of knockdown, screaming, fights because I respect his opinion, because he respected mine. But more often than not, we'd talking, I'd call him and say, look, I'm just there. We've got to buy this company. There's no way we can get around. We've got to make it happen. And he'd say, that's the stustest thing in the world. And he'd call me a half an hour later and say, okay, I agree. I think we got to buy this. Now you're going too slowly. And I'd say, I'm not sure I want to do it anymore. And we'd just be constantly kind of going back and forth. So it's a good, healthy debate.
Can you think of anything obvious that you learned from any of your...
What didn't I learn from him? I'll tell you, actually, here's a wonderful story. So I was at a startup before I came to Sun. And the biggest honor for me when I got to Sun was I got to go out to lunch with Scott McNealy. This guy's an industry icon. He's the father of most of what we look at in the world. So we go out to Chevy's, of course, because it's Scott's favorite restaurant. And we're coming back in an automobile, and we drive into the Cupertino parking lot, because that's when his office was down in Cupertino. And he drives into the parking lot, and it was the bubble, and every single parking space was filled. but there was a handicap space, a customer space, and a security space. And I said, why don't you just take one of them? And he stopped the car and he put it in park and he looked at me and he said, if I take one of those spaces today, there will be no free spaces in any Sun parking lot anywhere across the world. So it ain't gonna happen.
You know the Steve Jobs story.
No, I do not.
Shortly after he returned as ICEO, he took his Mercedes and parked it in the handicap spot, you know, and somebody put a little sign in there that said park different.
I'm not surprised.
So there was once upon a time.
And by the way, that's why we don't have a backdating issue.
There was once upon a time where the wisdom at Sun that I heard was all about revenue per employee. Bill Joe would instruct me on the importance of this. This was a long time ago, probably even in the late 80s. And, you know, I just sort of, for the fun of it, before I came in here, I tried to do the numbers.
What is it?
Well, it's, you know, this is, I think it's somewhere around $433,000, which I think was where it was at, you know, 20 years ago. So, I mean,
It's just our employees make a lot more money now.
does it, I mean, is that not the way you look at the business anymore? I'm back again to the question of whether you have the right number of employees now.
Gervais Restaurant, authentique French cuisine in Silicon Valley.
So let's talk about employee expense for a second. I don't believe employees are an expense. They're not a cost to be reduced. And if there's an employee at Sun whose costs we're trying to reduce, then get rid of them and find an outsourced company that does that as a core competence. We are horrible at arbitraging rent or labor costs down. It's a stupid thing to do. It's just not our core business. You know, there's lots of folks who said, let's go move all our folks to India because it's cheaper. We'll move them to China because it's cheaper. Niagara, which is our, you know, first generation 32-way chip, massively power efficient server. We shipped it in December of last year. I announced it in London because it's the most expensive real estate in the world at the time. And it's a really miniature little, you know, price performance server. And it went from 0 to 100 million in 6 months, 100 million a quarter in 6 months. This past quarter we did, you know, over 100 million again. So how much do we pay the engineers who built that product? Like I give a hoot. What I care about is why didn't we ship it 9 months earlier? So in thinking about the wage rates of folks at Sun and how we think about profitability and do we have the right number of employees, I want to have the right employees. I want to make sure that they're highly compensated, hopefully the best in the industry, which we got to work on. And if we do, we'll create the best products in the marketplace, and that's how we'll go win. And ultimately, what are we going to do? We're going to profile the company. We've said we've been very transparent in the marketplace. 4% operating profit in Q4 of this, you know, of our fiscal year, which ends in the second quarter of next calendar year. And other than that, I'm way more focused on investing in employees than I am about trying to figure out ways to reduce them or cost reduce them.
You know, I listen to the analyst calls occasionally. They're like a broken record. I mean, are you having an
Don't
education?
you love Tony Sakanagi's comment?
I was thinking
Actually. No, I mean, Tony's actually a little funnier. So for those of you who don't know, Tony Sakanagi's an analyst with Sanford Bernstein, really smart guy, very clever, and occasionally makes some inflammatory statements to get a little press. And so one of the comments he made recently was, you know, Sun needs to reduce the number of heads. It has to become a profitable company. And, you know, you may have noticed we actually announced a restructuring back in May. We said we'd take out, I think it was 4,000 to 5,000 full-time employees across the company to try to get the cost down, to try to get the business model a little more attractive. And Tony's comment was, that's not enough. They need to lay off 15,000 to 20,000 people. Of course, if they laid off 15,000 to 20,000 people, they probably wouldn't have a viable business, but let's not be bothered with that. Next comment. And so, you know, my point to, you know, a lot of folks who looked at this is, we could become really profitable really fast. Fire all 35,000 people. Boom, we'd be really profitable for about 20 minutes. And then next quarter, no one would answer the phone. My blog would be dark. There'd be no, you know, store to buy anything from. There'd be no new products. So we've got to have the right balance between good employees, good products, and good prospects. And when we get those all together, there's lots of upside.
And the mix, I mean, here in Silicon Valley, I mean, are you still playing? I think the other comments where you said there were heads, and the head count's going to go down by a couple thousand over the next quarter.
Yeah.
Where do you have too many people? Just categories.
We are working on processes that are not competitive advantages for Sun. And wherever there is something that does not contribute to our competitive advantage, I don't want those folks involved. We don't have anybody, last I checked, full-time who works in our cafeterias. I don't want folks who work in there. That's not going to help me win new business. So there's lots of things.
Have you eaten at Google recently?
I have not eaten at Google recently. I've heard a lot about Google's cafeteria from my friends who work there. All of them are 25 pounds heavier. We don't do a lot of manufacturing anymore. Why? Because we work with Flextronics and Selectron and Sanmina, and you know, those guys are great at manufacturing. We will choose to do the R&D that we think is necessary. We're going to make sure that we have the right coverage on the right customers, so we're going to probably reduce our coverage on customers. We've already started reducing over the past year, coverage on customers that don't matter. And now we're recovering my dentist? No, we weren't, but there were certainly some customers that looked like my dentist and had a similar spending profile. You know, I was with one customer, actually, it was about 2 years ago. It was down in Texas, and I got, you know, the sales rep brought me in, they were really happy, they were really pleased. We just won this big, big, big SAP deal. And I asked the guy on the way in, how big was the SAP deal? And he said it was like $1.5 million. And so I'm in there with the CIO, and I said, by the way, just out of curiosity, what's your IT budget? And he said about $2.2 million. I was thinking, okay, we won that much of it. And meanwhile, down the road was a large telco, who shall remain nameless, on which there wasn't any account coverage. Why? Because in the process of cutting as rapidly as we had been, we had not actually been as coherent as I would have liked to make sure we get the right people in front of the right customers. So we're going to get, you know, we're going to continue to reprofile the company to get everybody focused on competitive advantages for Sun. And take those things that look like they can be cost reduced and just move them out of the company. Don't even bother cost reducing them. Just find somebody else who can do it on our behalf. And we're doing that every day.
Let's talk Linux. It's been a big news week for Linux.
It sure has.
There was,
but I don't know much about open source.
There was Red Hat and Oracle last week, and I don't know, everybody may have been coming here, but Steve Ballmer came to San Francisco this afternoon and announced a huge interoperability cooperation deal with Novell. Quite striking because Ray Norda is barely dead, what, like 2-3 weeks, and just like that. So if any of you have been around and remember.
To be clear, what he said was he was coming to San Francisco to protect his IP.
Yes.
And Novell then talked about, you know, interoperability.
So, you know, how does that affect Sun?
Well, I think a few things. Number one, it just reminds everybody, again, how central operating systems are to the evolution of the internet. In all seriousness, in that every 10 years, it seems like everybody wants OSs to go away, so we all dismiss them. We write a press release about the future, and then OSs come back to be the most important assets on the internet. And you remember this happened with IBM not too long ago. They said the PC is this great thing. Just go get your OS from that little company up north, and oops. So that company made a similar mistake recently when they said, OSs don't matter, just go get Linux. And both IBM and HP actually made that point. And the problem, I think at the time, was they didn't realize how central operating systems would again become. And I don't think Oracle did when they originally invested in Red Hat. And now that Red Hat acquired JBoss and is trying to build out a business that will erode Oracle, Oracle got into a cage fight with Red Hat, and once again, I think reminded the world how important operating systems are. So number one, OSs matter, and we thankfully have been continually investing in our core operating system, and we're seeing lots of competitive advantage now because we got one. The other guys don't.
You're also, I think, are you all by yourself in the industry at this point, is having the entire stack from silicon to?
We are all by ourselves in having both the entire system stack, silicon all the way up to the application infrastructure. We're also the only company that didn't have to make the choice between protect the community and put our customers at risk, or protect our customers and put the community at risk. And we're the only one that threaded the needle, that both built an open source community, built a very vibrant community, and protected our customers against things like the BlackBerry suit that threatened to take BlackBerries out of the network. So that matters, and I think we're seeing some advantage out of it.
You would argue then that you're going to be the biggest beneficiary of Microsoft's cudgel on...
I didn't say that, you did.
You did bring up this IP thing, though.
Well,
Microsoft hasn't sued anybody, but you're suggesting that there's some saber rattling going on.
You're not.
No, I actually have to agree with you, but they haven't sued anybody.
That's not what happened with Novell?
Well...
that wasn't a settlement?
Well, yes, I mean, but, okay.
Look, independent of that, I think right now, look, it was a feature in what Oracle announced when they decided to destroy Red Hat. They would indemnify Red Hat's customers, and Red Hat couldn't. It was a feature in what Microsoft announced today with Novell. So it doesn't have to be Sun saying that intellectual property matters or indemnity matters. Those folks are doing it. And by the way, I think a lot of CIOs and executives saw what happened with BlackBerry, and they don't want it to happen to them. And what happened with BlackBerry is they were sued by a Canadian company, and they were threatened to be pulled out of all the networks. And that would be a huge issue. So we hear from our customers, we want open source, we want multi-vendor support, we want free products, we want community engagement, and we also want indemnity so that nobody can sue us later on. And we're uniquely in a position to be able to answer both. And yes, I do think that's a big advantage.
It sounds like a good argument. The problem, and I hear this from the analysts, is there's still skepticism about the value of the operating system of Sun's business. You make an indirect argument. It's a good indirect argument, but it's an indirect argument. And same
I think we just grew double digits in every single business we're in and delivered 43.5% gross margin. So it seems pretty clear to me that we have an advantage that the other guys don't, because they're not looking at 43.5% gross margin, and they're certainly not looking at systems growth at the rate that we are.
You also got some credit in the last quarter, was it 6 months, for picking up market share in hardware.
A lot of market share.
But what I couldn't see in the numbers was rare. So
in the system side?
Yeah.
It was across the board, low end and high end.
So that means Niagara and
Yeah, Niagara is probably the most aggressive, and but we still gained in the mid-range and on the high end.
And so did it happen now? I mean, is it an artifact of this period before Intel gets its quad-core processor together?
No, we'd be thrilled to see Intel show up with a quad-core processor. We'd love to see that innovation in the marketplace. We're huge supporters of Intel already. Most Solaris runs on Intel.
You almost said in the conference call that you would consider adding Intel to your AMD line. Is that, I mean, would you?
We are very interested in serving customers, and the reason why we're shipping AMD is that AMD's customers, the customers said that AMD is the best product in the marketplace. We wanted to respond to that. But a little competition in the network is not a bad thing. It's good for everybody. And look, Intel's very focused on AMD, and AMD is very focused on Intel, and that's, I think, good for customers. Meanwhile, we're very focused on unit volumes, and we got a lot of Solaris unit volume out there.
Would it unit volume, commercial licensed unit volume, is that what are we?
Our x64 server business is a $600 million a year business for Sun. Now, I think we're the number 6th or number 5th vendor, and Ashley would probably know. But we were about the number 957th vendor in the marketplace about 2 years ago. So 957th to number 6 or 5 is not a bad ramp, and we're growing, 75% year over year. So the ramp that we're seeing out in the marketplace on the hardware side as well as on the software side is pretty dramatic. Now, the thing I think that the industry and a lot of folks in the marketplace don't understand, and in fact, I'll give you a great example in this room. As we say in our business, volume matters. And you would know this actually from your business, readership matters, volume matters. If you don't have volume, you can't figure out a way to monetize it.
You should have seen the memo we just got explaining our decline in circulation internally.
Oh, I'd love to actually read that.
I'll send it to you.
I won't post it on my blog. Most of the world will first experience the internet on their phone. And no one in this room would have guessed that. Because most of you, how many of you have a PC or a Mac? Raise your hand. It's not everybody. Everybody in the whole room. That's not true for most of the world. 10 to 1 people have phones, not PCs. So most of the world's going to experience the internet on their phone. The volume that Sun sees on that phone, most of those phones, by the way, will also run Java, which means most of the front end on the internet is actually not going to be the desktop that I was worried would occlude our ability to build a business in the network. So the volume in the short run, that's been building for 5, 6, 7 years. Wall Street's never been paying attention to it. They didn't really care. I care a lot, because now that's going to be a huge amount of volume in the network.
Well, I see that volume. It's all true, all believable, particularly the part about where the internet grows. Have you left something on the table? The very first time I saw Java, which was, 93, 94, something like that, it was running on a little device that ran in my hand, or John Gage's hand, as it was. Have you guys...
Probably an Ethernet cable that ran into the back room. That made a lot of noise.
It was portable, actually.
Okay.
But have you guys left something on the table? We keep having this conversation every time I see you about Sunrays, and you just talked about cleanyourteeth.com or the dentist.com idea. It seems like a no-brainer. It seems like all the pieces of the puzzle have come together, and doesn't it give you guys the opportunity to move into a space where nobody is seen fit to do yet?
No, I think lots of people have seen fit to do it, and they've done it. It's called an iPod or a Sliver or a Razor or the next generation Nokia navigation system you plug into your dashboard. We're not a consumer company. We're in the business of serving other companies that want to serve consumers. And so yes, we build technologies that eventually, and often flash a logo in front of your face to remind you who Sun is, but we're not in the business of serving consumers explicitly. The only exception to that rule is we adore developers. And so we'll do whatever it takes to go serve developers on desktops, because that's where developers build things.
Gervais Restaurant, authentic French cuisine in Silicon Valley.
Fair enough, but still there's that vision of a screen, a mouse, and an internet connection in every dentist office in the known universe. That's a pretty big market. Why doesn't it exist? It's, Larry Ellison was down about it in 1995.
So first of all, I think it does exist. It's just it's not as appealing to the marketplace as having a robust, thick client. And look, we could go down this. Believe me, we could spend a lot of time. I don't believe in thin clients. Right there, I said it.
My goodness, I'm shocked.
No, well, and the reason I just had this conversation with Eric Schmidt. He was telling me about how he believes in the world of thin clients. And I said, Eric, come on, you're a thick client company. He said, what do you mean? And I said, your client's called Firefox. It's 25 megabytes, guy. Come on. You're just getting a free ride. And by the way, last I checked, Google Earth is like, what, 190 megabytes? You're a thick client company. The world needs persistent clients to go deliver the interactivity that consumers want. iTunes is a thick client. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a wonderful product. iPods are thick clients. Motorola phones are thick clients. Sunray's not a thick client, and your TV set isn't a thick client. But in the short term, that's a minority of the overall market opportunity. Longer term, and I'll give you a wonderful example. Hurricane Katrina, big disaster in New Orleans. The Red Cross wanted to go down and deliver relief services to a bunch of victims. They needed to send a bunch of workers down who then needed network connectivity. They had two choices. They could give them all a PC and toady the PC administrator, or they could give them a Sunray, and they gave them a Sunray. And why? Because it was instant on, because if it got broke, it didn't matter, throw it away, put a new one in. There was no state on the device. You didn't have to worry about viruses or rebuilding the machine. You just kind of turned it off and turned it on, and it worked. For those types of environments, which are process-driven, really dedicated environments, Sunrays are wonderful applications. They're great, but that's a minority of the overall marketplace.
And it'll never work, as an adjunct to a cable company or a phone company?
It absolutely may. But it's not core to the future of Sun, because what we want is for there to be a diversity and a volume of devices to be out in the marketplace, not for us to own the front end of the internet. So there's a wonderful book, and I pump it wherever I go, and all of you should read it, called Empires of Light. It's about the history of electricity, and if you read it, you'll learn something really interesting, which is that Thomas Edison tried to patent the light bulb to make sure if you bought his generator, you had to buy his bulbs. He failed, and everyone else who tries to make sure there's a lock between the client and the server will similarly fail. That's just not how markets work.
So, how about Google as a partner? It seems like you're more cagey about your relationship to them than they are with you. I mean, Eric has said probably more than you've said.
We have a tighter NDA that goes our way to his way than he is, his way to our way.
I mean, could Google explain a lot of your growth?
I can't comment on our revenue streams.
But I can wonder.
You can.
They are known as a company that builds their own.
In fact, Tony Sakanagi had this great question when we announced a $100 million quarter for Niagara. And he said, was that one purchase order from Google? I was like, no, Tony, it was actually better. They were seed units. And there's an awful lot of seeds planted in the marketplace now.
But how about the partnership?
I love that they exist. I think they're a great company. I think they are representative of innovation and risk-taking in the internet, and I think I'm just glad they exist. And they drive a lot of competition, and they drive a lot of conspiracy. And right now, Microsoft's really focused on that.
How is your partner, Steve Ballmer? Where are you with the revenue deal that you guys struck? You're still getting hundreds of $1 millions?
No, we get, I don't know what the exact numbers are. We get some revenue from Microsoft. We get revenue from lots of places. But the core systems growth of the company is coming from solving the problems that customers need to have solved, which is they need more scale, they need more power efficiency, they need more space efficiency, and they need the technologies that we're building. And look, Sony's about to announce the next generation PlayStation. Wouldn't it be interesting if there was some Sun technology on the PlayStation 3? I can't. He's from PR. He'd kill me if I actually leak. So I can't leak because I don't want to be pretexted.
Ashley will probably appreciate that if he has the answer, actually.
There's this supercomputer competition that DARPA has been holding, which you are playing in.
Yeah.
High throughput
Yeah.
or high availability computing.
High productivity.
Do you know where it is?
We don't. I mean, we've submitted our bid, we've done our best and final, and we'll figure out when government wants to tell us. I'm just as eager as you.
So, we're getting to the point where I want to open it up to our audience, but I didn't want you to get away from you without asking a little bit about politics. My sense is, Scott was very vocal. Have you intentionally been not as vocal? I mean, a lot of people have a sense of what your politics are, but you have, to my knowledge, not said anything about it since you became CEO. Was that by intention, or just nobody remembered to ask?
In my view, it's inappropriate in the workplace.
Different view than Scott's?
Yeah.
Okay. So, would you participate in things that you thought benefited the industry that were political, or is it entirely, I mean, kind of these TechNet things, Prop 87 comes to mind. John Doerr's pushing it like mad, and you, inappropriate?
No, so look, I want to make sure that first of all, I have a very strict rule in my life, which is I don't mix business and pleasure, ever. And the times in my past where I've done that, it's always come to a bad end. I'm not going to go down that path again. I have very strong beliefs about the way the world ought to work. I have a very strong belief about the role technology has in opening markets and creating democracies and driving freedoms, and I'm very much interested in pursuing that. But I also don't want to dip into things that cause a Sun employee to say, I don't want to work for somebody who believes in that. I want our objectives, because that's what our shareholders aren't paying to have me go stump for a candidate. Shareholders are paying to have me go build a business, and I want to build the strongest business I can and not have to get into debates, which I can as an individual. I'm just not going to do that wearing the hat that I'm wearing. Like, I mean, there's another great example of this. I am aggressive philanthropically. I believe that folks who have achieved a certain station in life or have been accorded advantages in society have an obligation to give back to the world. I'm just not going to use Sun's money to go do that, because that's not what our shareholders are investing in us to go. They're not investing in us to have us go put our name on a building somewhere. They're having us invest on their behalf so they could go put their name on the building. So I think there's a pretty clear line to me.
Good, good. So why don't we, I think we have some microphones. Let's open it up for a while and see what our audience has to ask you. Questions? Feel free. And if you could please identify yourself, just so we know a little bit about you.
It's Luke Lonergan. So Jonathan, I'm just curious, to what extent do you think that the emphasis on power efficiency of the servers and technology is going to be driving business decisions going forward? I know it's something that Sun has initiated and has really led with, but to what extent do you think that impacts businesses' decision-making in terms of IT acquisitions over the next couple of years?
I think it's enormous. And not because it's a political issue, but because it's attractive. I mean, there's this wonderful quote that Dave Douglas, who's the head of eco-responsibility at Sun, which is a funny title to have for somebody who works for a computer company. But as he reminds me, that eco and eco-responsibility stands for economics. And the reason why power efficiency is an issue in the marketplace is for the same reason that efficiency is an issue in the marketplace. If you build a more power efficient system, you can get more work done and you pay less to have that happen. So I think we're just on the cusp of having it become a truly mammoth issue. And just as one simple thing to go think about, a laptop is what, 150, 175 watts? If there are 100 million laptops in the world, just pick a number, what do you think happens to the world's power infrastructure? You need an awful lot of power plants. So even the process of connecting people into the internet takes a lot of juice. And I don't want to go saddle an economy with the need to go build a new gigawatt power plant. If we can build infrastructure that allows them to bring more people online with less money. That, by the way, is also a competitive advantage. And by the way, it's not just Sun's competitive advantage. If you go look at what, for example, GE is doing out in the marketplace with eco-imagination, they figured out the same thing. If you build a locomotive and it gets better miles to the gallon than the other guy's locomotive, you win all the business. So I think it's going to continue to be a huge issue.
What do you think of Nicholas's $100 laptop with a crank?
Love to see it work. And by the way, sun rays take 12 watts. The point's not gone unnoticed. It's just not going to replace Goldman Sachs Trader's desktop. Yes.
Hi, I'm Christine Tazzi, and this might be trying your memory a little bit, but you started a sentence that said the most important thing about being a CEO, and then that cell phone rang, and you didn't finish it. And I've been waiting to hear if you remember where your thought was going on that. It's something about the role of the most important thing.
No, I remember, and because it is my #1 job. The most important role of any leader, and I don't care if you're the CEO or you're the VP of marketing or you're just a manager who got promoted to manage 10 people, is communication. Why write a blog? To communicate as broadly and as frequently and as aggressively as I can. Because you can't lead unless you tell people where you're headed or why you're headed there. And so I think every manager's responsibility is to be a prolific communicator. Because then no one's ever surprised by the direction where you're headed. And by the way, you may actually inform some people who want to help. And you're not going to get there if you keep everything a state secret. And look, at this point, I'm way more worried about the state secrets inside of Sun than I am about worrying about a leak. And look, we've had leaks at Sun, and not to get back to that entire discussion, that's not the worst problems we have. My worst problems are the stuff we didn't leak. I mean, seriously, my worst problems are we got an ISP, he just stood up over there, who builds a technology platform that's 10 times more price performant than his competitor in the marketplace. His big issue is the same issue I've got. I want to tell the world that it exists. Because then we can save a lot of money and they can go spend it on something better. But I got to communicate to make sure that that happens. Is that a hand or is my retina frying?
Joseph Antonio of Interactive Systems and Consulting. It seems that every time I heard Scott McNealy's talk over the past few years, up to 185 days ago, when he was introduced as the CEO of Sun, he would start off his talk by saying, "I'm absolutely amazed that the board has allowed me to retain my position." How secure do you feel in your position with your board?
I think being a CEO and given what's going on with corporate governance right now, I don't think any CEO feels confident or comfortable. And I think, by the way, that's good for stockholders. None of us should be, comfortable. If all you do is just take advantage of your station in life and, get paid well to do so, I'm not sure shareholders are well served. So I know that my board and Sun's board is supportive of the direction we're headed. They're very supportive of the management team and the team that we've built up around us. I think they're hugely supportive of the vision of the company. Certainly, having Scott involved for 22 years or 20 plus years, the articulation of the vision of the network is the computer. It's only getting more true as every year, moves forward. So I think every one of us and everyone who's in the private sector, and I'll tell you a great story. My dad grew up in the Depression in New York, and his dad got laid off and he worked in a vegetable store. And so the only thing that my dad cared about when he was growing up was having job security. And thus he became a tenured professor, and then he achieved his ideal in life. He got a job with the government. And so I got out of school and I went to go work for McKinsey & Company. And his first comment to me was, "What's your contract?" And I said, "Dad, there's no contract." And he said, "Then don't take the job. You gotta have a union contract, otherwise you could be fired." So if you work in the private sector in this country, your job's always at risk. You gotta perform, you gotta deliver, and you gotta make sure you're doing a good job. And I'm sure John feels the same way.
I've got a union contract.
John's a little more comfortable. John has a few other sectoral issues.
John?
Yeah.
My name is Bala Miduri. So I want to touch on the Niagaras because that seems to be catching like a wildfire. Like Google's or eBay's of the world started using the Niagaras, where the data center space, like the power consumption and the processing, and it's great for them because they're getting all this for dead cheap compared to your high-end 2900s and things like that, right?
Yep.
So in some sense, Sun is cannibalizing its own sort of high-end market, which is not necessarily bad. I mean, it's great for eBay, Google's of the world. How good is it for the Sun from a margins or the market perspective?
So I'll tell you an interesting story. The head of sales for North America called me up when we just introduced the Niagara back in December. And he said, I had this $250,000 deal. It was done. It was going to get it done by the end of December. And you just introduced that damn Niagara thing. And I took it into my account, and the account ended up spending $15,000 instead of whatever, $250,000. What are you thinking? You people in headquarters are idiots. You don't understand what's going on in the marketplace. And if I sell this into my install base, all I'm going to do is just kill my business. And I said, okay, here's the cue. Don't sell it into just your install base. Sell it into other people's install bases, and then you can go, get after that revenue stream. So, a few things. One, when we build computers that are twice as fast, people don't buy half as many of them. They buy twice as many, or 3 times as many, or 5 times as many, because they get more value out of them. When you build a computer that's twice as efficient, people don't buy half as many. They figure out what else they can do with it, and they move more work onto you. So we see this as a way to expand our market, not only within our current customers, but also to go drive our market out with some of our competitors' install bases. And look, it's great. These systems are so energy efficient that PG&E in the state of California issues a $1,000 rebate to anyone who puts one in as soon as they take out our competitor's server. Think about that. It's a $5,000 machine, and they give us a $1,000 subsidy. Why? Because we take up less power. What do the other guys got to do? They got to work against that, and that's pretty tough. So most businesses have, a portion of their business that is really network facing, that's going to be really sensitive to what Niagara can do. But then they got a lot of work that isn't very well performed on a Niagara system. And as an example, 5 years ago, we sat down with folks like Google and eBay and a bunch of other web farm companies and said, what do you need in a computer? And they started telling us. They said, energy is a big problem, space is a big problem. And we asked them a simple question as an example. Do you do any floating point math here at eBay or at Google? And if you know anything about most computers, they devote half their brains to doing math and half their brains to moving data around. And these folks said, no, we don't have any floating point at all. So we said, okay, let's take it off the chip. Therefore, if you would like to model a bomb on a Niagara, you'll be waiting weeks. And they're really bad at modeling bombs or modeling portfolios or finding oil. But they're wonderful at the majority of the workload of the internet, which is running VoIP streams or video streams or instant messaging or propagating transactional workflows or running Oracle databases or running SAP systems. So the world is increasingly complex, but it's also increasingly sensitive to performance improvements, and we think we have a pretty important one. And by the way, the next generation Niagara will be much better at modeling bombs because we put floating point back on.
Hi. So you said that you don't have a consumer presence, yet one of the biggest trends in the enterprise is innovation spilling over from the consumer side to the enterprise. So Google, Apple, Microsoft, HP, Dell, even Cisco, they all now have consumer presences. How does Sun get perceived as the way forward without that, as opposed to being perceived as like a digital equipment with great technology?
So here's something to think about. How many of you use Google? How many asked your CIO if you could use Google? None of you did. You all made choices. And most enterprises don't say, well, which HP product are you using? Because I'm going to warp my enterprise systems to go focus on that HP product. What they care about is that there's hundreds of millions of wireless subscribers in the US who have phones. But they're not picking a phone to determine how they modify their enterprise infrastructure. What they're doing is following consumers. Therefore, what's happened is most of these enterprises are trying to build service infrastructure that is agnostic with respect to what the consumer is using, because they want to get all the consumers, whether they're on dashboards or mobile handsets or desktops or game machines or ATM machines, doesn't matter. So enterprise decision making has moved from the CIO making all the calls, like which servers you're allowed to run in your network, to the CIO making a few calls, like which PC you get to use, to the CIO making no calls, like how many of you asked your CIO which phone you were going to use? Likely none of you. Maybe some of you if you've got a really draconian CIO. And increasingly, they're not allowed to make those decisions. Those decisions are going to be made not by their own employees, they're going to be made by the consumers that people are trying to address. So I'm not worried about what DEC's biggest problem is their technology didn't matter to the industry. And they didn't have an OS that people wanted. Their chipset was really fast, but they had no developers. We got lots of developers, we got lots of opportunity, and we're growing, which is something that DEC couldn't do. And now I'd ask a different question, which is, how is it that HP and IBM, given that they've pretty much kissed away their developer communities, how are they going to create differentiation in the marketplace? And it was great. I had an analyst tour recently, and although I love Dell and they're a business partner, it was awfully gratifying to have investors say to me, you know, it's funny, 5 years ago we were looking at you and thinking, God, you got to be more like Dell. And now we're looking at Dell thinking, God, you guys got to be more like Sun. Because what do you have to differentiate? Nothing. So.
2 more questions.
And Dell is a value business partner. Appreciate the channel volume they offer us.
Hi, my name is Rashmi Murthy and I work for Synopsys. You might have been asked this question several times in the past. What are some of your plans to make sure that the stock price of Sun goes up to where it was a few years ago? Any comments?
So just to put this all in context, at our peak, I think we had a market capitalization of $230 billion. And we were trading at about, I don't have the exact numbers, 20 times revenue. I think that was the bubble. So I'm not focused on, getting back to 225 billion. I'm focused on making sure that we're consistently growing the company and growing the value of the company, because that's how you get from roughly 19 billion where we are today to more than 19 billion. In order for us to do that, we've got to first and foremost make sure that we're attracting more developers and more volume. And I know that doesn't make any economic sense to anybody in the room, but if you don't have volume and you don't have a developer community, you have a dying business. So I want to make sure that we have a future, and developers and developer platforms are how we're doing that. The second thing is I want to make sure the infrastructure we're building is differentiated from the competition. The guys who just build undifferentiated stuff and are going to compete on price will lose. Why? Because we'll show up with a black box that's 150 teraflops for $1 million, and I don't care how little their server is, it ain't going to compete against that. And for the kinds of customers we're talking to, that shipping container is actually enormously relevant. My dentist wouldn't know what to do with it, but I can tell you some of the big web farm companies know a lot about what to do with it. So, if we can get those 2 things right, we can build a successful business. We can build a growing business. We can build one that's increasingly profitable, and that's ultimately what investors want to invest in. And look, share price is a really easy thing. You want more people buying and holding your stock than you have selling. And if you want to know why our share price has been going up recently, that's why. More people have said, that's a good story. I want to own that stock, and I'm going to sit on it for a while. And what I want to do is focus on making sure we give those folks an attractive return over a period of time.
Final question here.
Hi, my name is Merrill Lynch, formerly Sun. Just a quick question about global trends. Asia, APAC is booming. Sun has long looked at APAC as a major opportunity area. Just any comments about world markets?
Developing nations for us are the most rapidly growing businesses we're in. Our Latin American business right now is on fire, like 40, 50, 60% growth. Why? Because developing nations have figured out they can skip over a bunch of legacy IT investments and get to a future if they get on the internet. If they can get basic communications in the hands of their citizens. And not if they can get a PC into their hands of citizens, but if they can do something simple, like get a simple handset that can receive an SMS text message. People can become more efficient if they use that basic communications technology. So I think across the world, there are a few sectors that are really aggressively investing in IT. And not surprisingly, they are telecommunications companies who are dominantly becoming media companies. They are media companies who are trying to become technology companies or telecommunications companies. They're financial services companies. And there are governments who are looking at investments in the internet as a vehicle to serve their citizens. And what's interesting about governments is they are some of the few businesses around the world that when they look at a country, think everybody in the country is their user. So they build, portals to serve citizens as opposed to portals to serve, people who want to buy shampoo. So the dominant trend across the world is computing is vital, but it is the commodity. It's not the computers that are a commodity. Now, commodities are wonderful things for a couple of reasons, and I'll give you a great example of this. ExxonMobil, last quarter, I think, produced more in profit in one quarter than we will produce in revenue in a year on a commodity. So lest you think that commodities are bad businesses, they're actually the best businesses in the world, if and only if you have R&D I'll give you another great commodity company, Google. I mean, how many of you, if I made the fonts the same, could tell the difference between a Yahoo search and a Google search? Don't lie, you couldn't. So if you have R&D, there's an immense amount of opportunity you can have if in a commodity market, because they're global, perpetual, 24/7 markets. That's the market we're in. I think we have the right differentiation. I think we have the right leaders who can help us go get after the market opportunity. So in general, we're pretty bullish about the markets, especially out of North America, but also inside of it.
So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Jonathan. I think I wrote my first story about Sun when it was the Stanford University Network in 1982, and I wandered in on this graduate student named Andy.
Gervais Restaurant, authentic French cuisine in Silicon Valley.